Today we continue with Bram Stoker's tale of sartorial misadventure in Scotland, Crooken Sands. The servants had arrived some days before, and all things were in readiness. In the glow, consequent to a good lunch, after a hard journey, all the disagreeables of travel and all the chagrin consequent on the adoption of the obnoxious costume were forgotten. That afternoon, Markam, still clad in full array, walked through the mains of Crooken. He was all alone, for strange to say his wife and both daughters had sick headaches, and were, as he was told, lying down to rest after the fatigue of the journey. His eldest son, who claimed to be a young man, had gone out by himself to explore the surroundings of the place, and one of the boys could not be found. The other boy, on being told that his father had sent for him to come for a walk, had managed, by accident of course, to fall into the water butt, and had to be dried and rigged out afresh. His clothes not having been as yet unpacked, this was of course impossible without delay. Mr. Markam was not quite satisfied with his walk. He could not meet any of his neighbours. It was not that there were not enough people about, for every house and cottage seemed to be full, but the people, when in the open, were either in their doorway some distance behind him, or on the roadway a long distance in front. As he passed, he could see the top of heads and the whites of eyes in the windows around the corners of doors. The only interview which he had was anything but a pleasant one. This was with an odd sort of old man, who was hardly ever heard to speak except to join in the armains in the meeting-house. His sole occupation seemed to be to wait at the window at the post office from 8 o'clock in the morning till the arrival of the mail at 1, when he carried the letter bag to a neighbouring baronial castle. The remainder of his day was spent on a seat in the draughty part of the port, where the offal of the fish, the refuse of the bait, and the house rubbish was thrown, and where the ducks were accustomed to hold high revel. When soft Tommy beheld him coming, he raised his eyes, which were generally fixed on the nothing which lay on the roadway opposite his seat, and seemingly dazzled as by a burst of sunshine, rubbed them and shaded them with his hand. Then he started up, and raised his hand aloft in a denunciatory manner as he spoke. "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, all is vanity. One be warned in time. Behold the lilies of the field, they toil not, neither do they spin. Yet Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Man, the vanity is as a quicksand which swallows up all which comes within its spell. Beware vanity, beware the quicksand which yawneth for thee, and which will swallow thee up. See thyself, learn thine own vanity, meet thyself face to face, and then in that moment thou shalt learn the fatal force of thy vanity. Learn it, know it, and repent ere the quicksand swallow thee." Then, without another word, he went back to his seat and sat there immovable and expressionless as before. Markam could not but feel a little upset by this tirade. Only that it was spoken by a seeming madman, he would have put it down to some eccentric exhibition of Scottish humour or impudence. The gravity of the message, for it seemed nothing else, made such a reading impossible. He was, however, determined not to give in to ridicule, and although he had not yet seen anything of Scotland to remind him even of a kilt, he determined to wear his Highland dress. When he returned home in less than half an hour, he found that every member of the family was, despite their headaches, out taking a walk. He took the opportunity afforded by their absence of locking himself in his dressing-room, took off the Highland dress, and putting on a suit of flannels, lit a cigar and had a snooze. He was awakened by the noise of the family coming in, and at once donning his dress made his appearance in the drawing-room for tea. He did not go out again that afternoon, but after dinner he put on his dress again. He had of course dressed for dinner as usual, and went by himself for a walk in the seashore. He had by this time come to the conclusion that he would get by degrees accustomed to the Highland dress before making it his ordinary wear. The moon was up, and he easily followed the path through the sand dunes, and shortly struck the shore. The tide was out, and the beach firm as a rock, so he strolled southward, toward the near end of the bay. Here he was attracted by two isolated rocks some little way out from the edge of the dunes, so he strolled towards them. When he reached the nearest one, he climbed it, and sitting there elevated some 15 or 20 feet over the waste of sand, enjoyed the lovely, peaceful prospect. The moon was rising behind the headland of Pinnacle, and its light was just touching the top of the furthermost rock of the spurs, some 3/4 of a mile out. The rest of the rocks were in dark shadow. As the moon rose over the headland, the rocks of the spurs and then the beach by degrees became flooded with light. For a good while Mr. Markam sat and looked at the rising moon and the growing area of light which followed its rise. And then he turned and faced eastwards and sat with his chin in his hand, looking seawards, and revelled in the peace and beauty and freedom of the scene. The roar of London, the darkness and the strife and weariness of London life seemed to have passed quite away, and he lived at the moment a freer and higher life. He looked at the glistening water as it stole its way over the flat waste of sand, coming closer and closer, insensibly. The tide had turned. Presently he heard a distant shouting along the beach very far off. "The fishermen calling to each other," he said to himself, and looked around. As he did so, he got a horrible shock. For though just then a cloud sailed across the moon, he saw, in spite of the sudden darkness surrounding him, his own image. For an instant, on the top of the opposite rock, he could see a bald back of the head and the Glengarry cap with the immense eagle's feather. As he staggered back, his foot slipped, and he began to slide down towards the sand between the two rocks. He took no concern as to falling, for the sand was really only a few feet below him. His mind was occupied with the figure, a simulacrum of himself, which had already disappeared. As the easiest way of reaching terra firma, he prepared to jump the remainder of the distance. All this had taken but a second, but the brain works quickly. And even as he gathered himself for the spring, he saw the sand below him lying so marbly level shake and shiver in an odd way. A sudden fear overcame him. His knees failed, and instead of jumping, he slid miserably down the rock, scratching his bare legs as he went. His feet touched the sand, went through it like water, and he was going down below his knees before he realized that he was in quicksand. Wildly he grasped at a rock to keep himself from sinking further, and fortunately there was a jutting spur or edge which he was able to grasp instinctively. To this he clung in grim desperation. He tried to shout, but his breath would not come, till after a great effort his voice rang out. Again he shouted, and it seemed as if the sound of his own voice gave him new courage, for he was able to hold on to the rock for a longer time than he thought possible, though he held on only in blind desperation. He was, however, beginning to find his grasp weakening, when, joy of joys, his shout was answered by a rough voice from just above him. "God be thanked, I'm not too late," and a fisherman, with great thigh boots, came hurriedly climbing over the rock. In an instant he recognized the gravity of the danger, and with a cheering, "Hold fast, mon, I'm coming," scrambled down till he found a firm foothold. Then, with one strong hand holding the rock above, he leaned down, and catching Markam's wrist, called out to him, "Hold to me, mon, hold to me with the other hand." Then he lent his great strength, and with a steady, sturdy pull, dragged him out of the hungry quicksand and placed him safely upon the rock. Hardly giving him time to draw breath, he pulled and pushed him, never letting him go for an instant over the rock into the firm sand beyond, and finally deposited him, still shaking from the magnitude of his danger, high upon the beach. Then he began to speak. "Mon, but I was just in time. If I'd no looked at yon foolish lads, and begun to rin at the first, you'd have been sinking down to the bowels of the earth by the new. The bakery thought you was a ghaist, and Tom MacPhail swore you was only like a goblin or a puddock steel. Now, I said, yon's but the daft Englishman, the loony that had escaped from the waxworks. I was thinking it being strange and silly, if not a whole made feel, you'd not ken the ways of the quicksand. I shouted to warn you, and then ran to drag you off, if need be. But God but thank it, ye be fool or only half daft with your vanity that I was no that late." And he reverently lifted his cap as he spoke. Mr. Markam was deeply touched and thankful for his escape from a horrible death. The sting of the charge of vanity, thus made once more against him, came through his humility. He was about to reply angrily when suddenly a great awe fell upon him as he remembered the warning words of the half-crazy letter-carrier. Meet thyself face to face and repent ere the quicksand shall swallow thee. Here, too, he remembered the image himself that he had seen in the sudden danger from the deadly quicksand that had followed. He was silent a full minute, and then said, "Oh, good fellow, I owe you my life." The answer came with reverence from the hardy fisherman. I owe that to God, but as for me, I'm only too glad to be the humble instrument of his mercy." "Well, let me thank you," said Mr. Markam, taking both the great hands of his deliverer in his and holding them tight. "My heart is too full as yet, and my nerves are too much shaken to let me say much, but believe me, I am very, very grateful." It was quite evident the poor old fellow was deeply touched, for the tears were running down his cheeks. The fisherman said with a rough but true courtesy, "Why, sir, thank me an you will. If it'll do your poor heart good, and I'm thinking that if it were me, I'd be thankful too. But sir, as for me, I need no thanks. I'm glad so I am." That Arthur Franklin Markam was really thankful and grateful was shown practically later on. Within a week's time there sailed into Port Crooken the finest fishing smack that had ever been seen in the harbour of Peterhead. She was fully found, with sails and gear of all kinds, with nets of the best. The master and men went away by the coach after having left with the salmon fisher's wife the papers which made her over to him. As Mr. Markam and the salmon fisher walked together along the shore, the former asked his companion not to mention the fact that he had been in such imminent danger, for that it would only distress his dear wife and children. He said that he would warn them all of the quicksand, and for that purpose he then and there asked questions about it till he felt that his information on the subject was complete. Before they parted, he asked his companion if he had happened to see a second figure, dressed like himself, on the other rock as he had approached to succour him. No, came the answer. "There is nae sic another fool in these parts, nor has there been since the time of Jamie Fleeman, him that was a fool to the Lord of Udney. I'm on such a heathenish dress as ye have on, till ye hasna been seen in these parts within the memory of man. And I'm thinking that such a dress never was for sitting on the cold rock as ye done before. But do ye no fear the rheumatism or the lumbago with flopping down on the cold stones with your bare flesh? I was thinking that it was daft ye were when I see ye the morning down by the port, but it's fool or idiot ye mun be for the like of that." Mr. Markam did not care to argue the point, and as they were now close to his own home, he asked the salmon fisher to have a glass of whisky, which he did, and they parted for the night. He took good care to warn all his family of the quicksand, telling them that he had himself been in some danger from it. All that night he never slept. He heard the hours strike one after the other, but try how he would, he could not get to sleep. Over and over again he went through the horrible episode of the quicksand, from the time that soft Tammy had broken his habitual silence to preach to him of the sin of vanity, and to warn him. The question kept ever arising in his mind, "Am I then so vain as to be in the ranks of the foolish?" And the answer ever came in the words of the crazy prophet, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Meet thyself face to face, and repent ere the quicksand shall swallow thee." Somehow a feeling of doom began to shape itself in his mind that he would yet perish in that same quicksand, for there he had already met himself face to face. In the grey of the morning he dozed off, but it was evident that he continued the subject in his dreams, for he was fully awakened by his wife, who said, "Do sleep quietly, that blessed Highland suit has got on your brain. Don't talk in your sleep if you can help it." He was somewhat conscious of a glad feeling, as if some terrible weight had been lifted from him, but he did not know any cause of it. He asked his wife what he had said in his sleep, and she answered, "You said it often enough, goodness knows, for one to remember it. Not face to face. I saw the eagle plume over the bald head. There is hope yet, not face to face. Go to sleep, do." And then he did go to sleep, but he seemed to realize that the prophecy of the crazy man had not yet been fulfilled. He had not met himself face to face, as yet, at all events. He was awakened early by a maid who came to tell him that there was a fisherman at the door who wanted to see him. He dressed himself as quickly as he could, for he was not yet expert with the Highland dress, and hurried down, not wishing to keep the salmon fisher waiting. He was surprised and not altogether pleased to find that his visitor was none other than soft Tommy, who at once opened fire on him. I'm on going away to the post, but I thought that I would waste an hour on you and come round just to see if you were still that full with vanity as on the nick gone by. And I see that you've now learned a lesson. Well, the time is coming, sure enough. I ever have all the time in the mornings to mind, so I'll look round just till see how you gang your ain gate to the quicksand, and then to the dale. I'm after my work, to know. And he went straight away, leaving Mr. Markam considerably vexed, for the maids within earshot were vainly trying to conceal their giggles. He had fairly made up his mind to wear on that day ordinary clothes, but the visit of Soft Tommy reversed his decision. He would show them all that he was not a coward, and he would go on as he had begun, come what might. When he came to breakfast in full martial panoply, the children, one and all, held down their heads, and the back of their necks became very red indeed. As, however, none of them laughed, except Titus, the youngest boy, who was seized with a fit of hysterical choking, and was promptly banished from the room, he could not reprove them, but began his egg with a sternly determined air. It was unfortunate that as his wife was handing him a cup of tea, one of the buttons of his sleeve caught in the lace of her morning wrapper, with the result that the hot tea was spilt over his bare knees. Not unnaturally he made use of a swear word, whereupon his wife, somewhat nettled, spoke out. "Well, Arthur, if you will make such an idiot of yourself with that ridiculous costume, what else can you expect? You are not accustomed to it. You never will be." In answer he began an indignant speech with "Madam," but he got no further, for now that the subject was broached, Mrs. Markam intended to have her say. It was not a pleasant say, and, truth to tell, it was not said in a pleasant manner. A wife's manner seldom is pleasant when she undertakes to tell what she considers truths to her husband. The result was that Arthur Fernley Markam undertook then and there that during his stay in Scotland he would wear no other costume than the one she abused. Women like his wife had the last word, given in this case with tears. "Very well, Arthur. Of course you will do as you choose. Make me as ridiculous as you can, and spoil the poor girl's chances in life. Young men don't seem to care, as a general rule, for an idiot father-in-law. But I must warn you that your vanity will one day get a rude shock, if indeed you are not before then in an asylum or dead." And we will continue with that story tomorrow.